I want to talk about a situation here that, again, in no way absolves us from having drafted Dalton Kincaid. At the same time, Ben, I mean, this is a Kyle Pitts situation. Again, you want to know what the catchable pass rate is for Mark Andrews? It's 92%. You want to know what it is for Tucker Kraft? It's 90%. You want to know what it is for Trey McBride playing with Kyler Murray, who is consistently like airballing potential touchdowns and then like making his one bad pass of the game when Trey McBride would have scored a touchdown? It's 89%. You want it is for George Kittle, who is lighting the world on fire? It's 89%. You want to know what it is for Dalton Kincaid? It's 71%.
71.
He had Dalton Kincaid wide open for an easy touchdown in this game and like couldn't even get it to his feet. Dalton Kincaid's turning like, am I the target? I know I'm the target because I'm wide open. There's no one around me. What is that pass? 71%. This is Kyle Pitts in Atlanta bad from the perspective of, and it's one of these things too where you can't go back and be like, oh, like Josh Allen is playing poorly. Josh Allen is Josh Allen. Josh Allen is a unicorn. One of the things that I've been writing about with Drake Maye, or at least thinking about, we'll see if it's been in the articles, but Drake Maye is like a more polished, composed version of Josh Allen, and he's that way much, much, much earlier. Very positive.
Yeah.
But do you even want that? Because one of the things about Josh Allen is that the franticness, the larger-than-lifeness, the craziness is part of what makes him unstoppable.
Yeah.
I mean, Drake Maye needs to bring a little bit of that bizarre energy in order to like carry the Patriots because the Patriots are so bad.
Yeah.
And he has no weapons and all of those things. Josh Allen doesn't need to throw accurate balls to Dalton Kincaid. He doesn't need to. It's unfortunate, but he doesn't need to.
I love this take because it is almost like Drake Maye's kryptonite is that he tries to play like a smart quarterback. He tries to play within himself a little bit. He's like, oh, I can fit this in here. And then he ends up throwing like a really bad pass. And it's like, no, just do crazy stuff. Like, just do it. Like when you're doing crazy stuff, it's looking great. Your Allen breakdown is spot on. He's almost like a defensive lineman or something, or like a linebacker or a safety that just plays 100 miles an hour, right? Like he's just like super intense and just jacked up and go. But like you're a quarterback, you're not supposed. But yeah, the erraticism is part of it. The Kincaid pass was brutal, potential 28-yard TD, and then he leaves the game right after. 24% routes is all he runs. 5 targets in that stretch, 50% targets per route. He only ran 10 routes.
They were talking about him coming in having an epic game.
Yeah.
And then it's all set up to do it. Josh Allen throws a bad pass, and then he gets hurt. And you're like, just make this game not have happened. Make this season for Dalton Kincaid not have happened. This is the worst.
It's brutal. He catches that TD. He still has a 3-catch, 50-yard TD game, which is like 14 points in PPR, even with playing a quarter of the game. And he's wide open. Even without that, you're looking at, easily heading to double-digit targets. I mean, it just looked like that. They didn't have Amari Cooper in. They didn't have Keon Coleman in. They were using Curtis Samuel a lot more after Kincaid went out, but they also couldn't get anything going. It was very clear that like the guy they wanted to feature in the passing game wasn't in the game anymore. If you watched this game, you mentioned, again, Joe Flacco literally, you said if you just stop throwing it to the other team, literally throws it to the other team on the first play from scrimmage, pick 6, puts him behind, and yet they're leading. Bills had the ball first, and they punt. Colts throw a pick 6, and you're like, okay, this game's over. Bills got ball first. I mean, this is brutal. Colts still wind up leading right before half, but the Bills closed the half well. They then started the second half. Oh, no, sorry. The third quarter was no one scored in the third quarter either. But Bills are able to pull away in the fourth. They win 30-20. Colts did score a garbage time TD there, but it was like 20-13. And then the Bills finally scored 10 points early in the fourth, make it 30-13. And then the Colts score at the very end. Alec Pierce catches the late TD. We get some stuff from Joe Flacco, unfortunately, for the wide receivers, for Josh Downs, for Alec Pierce, for Adonai Mitchell, for any of these guys. they are going back to Anthony Richardson, so we won't be seeing. I thought Adonai Mitchell looked good in this game. I thought he did some different things. Came back to the ball really well on one. Showed some after the catch ability. He did some things that were impressive. They could have won this game, man. They could have won this game. I'm right there with you on that note. We were also going to talk, Sean, unless you have some more thoughts on the Colts.
Stop turning the ball over, replay. You're still the quarterback. You're quarterback for all these best ball superflex teams. Josh Downs is a top 10 receiver in football. Mitchell is going to be a breakout star. Now we just have more teams auditioning the QBs they have to move on from. So it's too bad. It's too bad.
We were going to talk about the Lions and Texans. We haven't gone to them yet. This was one of the crazier games of the year. Jared Goff, I've been telling you, has been not adding a lot of air yards to his resume. The last few weeks, he's been really, really efficient, but no air yards. They get Jameson Williams back. It's clear they want to get the air yards back on the offense. The unfortunate thing is Jared Goff also had a habit of throwing the ball to the other team with 5 interceptions, and they still win the game. CJ Stroud does the same thing on the other side. First play of the second half, and then later underthrows Tank Dell. 2 interceptions for him. That first play of the second half, a brutally bad decision. You mentioned pre-show to me, great play on the defense. That's true, but you're up 23-7. You just can't throw a pick on the first play of the second half. You have an opportunity to start to run some clock and hopefully extend the lead, and instead you give a short field and bring them right back into the game with quickness. He also takes 4 sacks that are pretty big in this game. And yet I thought this was CJ Stroud's best game of the year. Weirdly, he had an incredible series of plays on the obvious passing downs where the Texans, you've been talking about this for weeks. I haven't necessarily been as adamant about it. I thought it was clear in this game. Should not have given Joe Mixon 25 carries when he only had 46 yards. I mean, he did have like one play that went for a big negative, but you're not even averaging 2 yards per carry. There's so many 1st and 10 carries that are 1 and 2 yards in this game. You can't just do it 25 times. You have to make an adjustment and allow your quarterback to throw on early downs, even if he's taking some sacks and some picks. And you understand from a coordinator perspective and from a head coach perspective, those negative plays feel more negative. They probably don't even see the Mixon 1-yard carries on 1st and 10 as negatives, but those are negatives, man. Those are really, really tough plays. And what they do on a lot of these run pass situations is they put CJ Stroud in obvious pass downs, long down and distance. Those are really hard plays to convert. Those are series that you have to punt. First drive of the game, run, 3rd and 10, CJ Stroud 13-yard conversion. Run, 3rd and 16, because Mixon had a negative 8-yard play on second down there. CJ Stroud, 16-yard conversion on 3rd and 16. They go on to score a touchdown on that drive because Stroud converts 2 3rd and 10 or longers on run pass sequences. He did that pretty much all night. Long down and distances, found the ability to hit guys, to move the ball. I thought that part of his game was awesome. And then he made a few Josh Allen type, like Drake May type plays. Like, what are you just doing? Joe Flacco type plays. What are you doing? Jameis Winston plays. I said in Stealing Signals as it referred to Goff, he went full Jameis. You never go full Jameis. It's not what you like to see in this one. Wild game. 7 interceptions. Lions end up winning it. Texans deal with some missed field goals. Another team that had multiple missed field goals. Right? Did they have the 3 missed field goals?
The Falcons were the team that
the other one
was defeated by the kicker, which you would never expect with Young Lee Koo. He's been absolutely fantastic through the years. There was almost a little bit of a macho element in this one, which, I mean, I kind of liked the Texans standing up for their kicker after the Lions kicker makes an incredible 58-yarder. You probably want to go for it there instead of having Fairbairn have to try a 58-yarder of his own. But Ben, I mean, this one, you always say these things and then like they happen the next week. But I don't know that we're going to ever see another game like this. You have a situation where the Lions are trailing by the 15 plus, and yet somehow they run the ball 32 times and only attempt 30 passes. You mentioned that the Texans can't do all that running, which I completely and totally agree with. they've taken all of the aggressiveness away, all of the confidence away from CJ Stroud. His body language in this game, I thought, was terrible. Not really from the perspective of like your body language where you're not competing or you're letting your team down, but his expressions were not the expressions of someone who's having fun and feeling confident. And that's, I think, how you get that underthrown ball to Tank Dell, where, I mean, that's the easiest touchdown that any team had all week. And he throws a pick instead. But in this game, I mean, they throw 33 times, only the 28 runs, I say only, I mean, if you're trying to make your offense work, it would have been far less than that. That part of it is bizarre. It's so frustrating to watch the Chiefs play every week where they have the 15 play, full quarter field goal drives. This game, I mean, this is a game with the 27 possessions. It's a game where you have a 5-play drive, 8-3-8. You did have the 111 play touchdown drive there for the Lions before things got super squirrely. But then 5-2, 8, 3-3-3, then 6, then another 3. And then we come out in the second half, and it seems like the Lions have really turned the momentum because the Lions are awesome. The Lions are the best team in football. They've got the best coach in football, at least from like this combination of intensity, leadership, just overall mindset of dominance perspective. They're showing the little halftime interview where he says the defense has to make a play. The first play, they make a play. A couple plays later, Jared Goff throws another pick. I mean, nothing changed there because Jared Goff threw the ball right back. Then you get 3-3, 5-2, 6-6, 3, 7, 4, 7, 9, 6. So just listing a bunch of numbers, I mean,
that's how many plays for each drive. A lot of them are 3 and outs. A lot of those 3s and the 2s and the 1s, because an interception on the first play or the second play, that's how you wind up with 27 total drives in a game.
I mean, you throw 5 picks against a lot of teams and you're going to run like 15 plays in the game. The Lions defense is awesome because they can both create the 3 and out and they can create the turnovers. Both of things cause problems for the opposing team because if you can't sit on the ball, that's one of the things that so many of these teams can do now and that they run into is that your own offense has to be extremely success rate oriented if your defense is going to allow long drives and then hold up in the red zone. Now, we understand why teams do that. We understand those tactics. In many ways, those tactics have been very effective, but it does change the mentality and it does change how you have to think through what you can do and the plays that you can call. One of the reasons that the Lions can call some of these vertical passes that sadly, once again, kind of exposed Jared Goff's arm for what it is, which, man, is not as much as you would hope, is that they can do everything else so well. So they have that opportunity even on the road, even against a team like the Houston Texans. And I mean, the Texans have been a pretty disappointing team this year, but they still do have CJ Stroud. They still do have an elite defense. To get that win on the road when you commit that many turnovers is one of the all-time great wins, and it certainly seems like it's going to send the Detroit Lions to the number 1 seed. There are still a lot of other good teams in the NFC. You could lose one of those games. But I mean, if you're a Detroit Lions fan, this is the most exciting season you've had since Barry Sanders and Scott Mitchell, Herman Moore, those dudes were running the run and shoot. And mostly still losing, but at least it was fun. I mean, this is fun, and the Lions are the best team in football.
The Lions are sweet. I completely agree. They're a really fun team. I was talking about the too much running. I'm looking at the fourth quarter drive logs. After the Lions cut the game to 23-20, CJ Stroud on 1st and 10 to Dalton Schultz for 17 yards to start that drive. Great. And then they run Joe Mixon for no gain, and they get a false start. Now they're 2nd and 15. They wind up punting 2 plays later. That's one of Stroud's sacks. He scrambles for 5 yards on 2nd and 15 and then gets sacked on 3rd and 10. It is hard to convert passing on 2nd and 15 and 3rd and 10. Like, the defense knows what you're doing. That's why he ends up scrambling for 5 yards. It's not even a scrambler. They're dropping back into coverage. Like that, the efficiency gaps on these types of plays compared to non-obvious downs and those things are massive. But this is what happens when you complete a 17-yard pass on 1st and 10, and then your team says, we're going to go run for 0 yards. And then, you get a false start and you shoot yourself in the foot a little bit. 2nd and 15. Lions get the ball back. They drive down. They make the field goal that ties the game now, 23-23. That was after the Lions had scored a touchdown to make it 23-20. Now it's 23-23. There's 5 minutes left. What do they do on 1st and 10? They run the ball to Joe Mixon. Okay, a couple plays later, 3rd and 6, CJ Stroud converts. 1st and 10, run the ball to Joe Mixon. Okay, 2nd and 8, CJ Stroud converts. 1st and 10, they run the ball to Joe Mixon. 2nd and 6, they run the ball to Joe Mixon. Now it's 3rd and 4, CJ Stroud throws an incomplete pass. How many times do you need him to bail you out on these situations? So then they have to kick a 58-yard field goal. It's just horrible play calling on gotta have it drives. Terrible sequencing. It's obvious on the down and distance stuff. It makes it easier for them to also defend the run. I would also argue that you're hurting Joe Mixon's rushing efficiency by giving him the ball on every 1st and 10 in these situations. It's just terrible. It's garbage. I mean, it's just like you're coaching scared. You're seeing the game slip away, and you're like, oh my God, we've had 5 interceptions, and we still might lose this. Let CJ Stroud drop back and go win the game. I mean, that's the part. He threw 2 picks. Show some confidence in him. I have a really, really hard time with how that game went. You go through and you look at some of the other, it's not every single situation, but you go through and you look at the numbers overall, drives that they started with a run versus drives that started with a pass. You can get that from RBSDM.com. It's Ben Baldwin's site. That stands for runningbacksdon'tmatter.com. You can go to their box scores and look at the series that started with a run versus the series that started with a pass and the success rate on the various series and those types of things. You will see that they started 16 1st and 10s with a run. They converted first downs on 8 of those for 50% success rate. They only started 11 with a pass. They converted 72.7% of those, significantly more. Whatever that number is, I guess probably 6 of 11 or something like that. 7 of 11. I don't know. No, it might be 8 of 11. Anyway. Math's hard. Now I'm going to be really confused by that math equation. Significantly better is the point when they threw on 1st and 10. And that doesn't mean that every single time it's going to be great. It does include a 1st and 10 to start the second half where CJ Stroud threw a pick, as we were talking about. But I did want to note John Mechie. I was pretty excited about him in this game. I talked him up in Stealing Signals a little bit. You seem maybe a little bit less convinced. But I've been talking about him for a couple of weeks from the perspective of they need somebody to step up with Stephon Diggs out. I've felt like the whole skill position group here has been poor. Joe Mixon's been okay, actually. Rough game here. Had a nice play in the passing game for 36 yards, ends up with 44 receiving yards. Dalton Schultz has not been very good. Has a couple plays, but he's not going to be anything other than just a tight end who makes plays when the game kind of comes to him. Tank Dell has been worse than last year, pretty clearly. 9 targets in this game for 39 yards. He had a big game the week prior against the Jets. Was hoping he could build on that. He does not here necessarily. Inconsistent is a word I would use with him. Nico Collins should be back this week. You expect Nico Collins to step in and be the clear number 1. And you would expect Dell to be that number 2, but he's been inconsistent, and Schultz has not necessarily stepped up. And I think that's why we did see when Diggs got hurt, he was starting to really actually be the go-to guy with Nico not in the lineup. He had a couple really nice timing plays and a couple moments there right before he tears his ACL. But Diggs didn't necessarily look like his peak self all year. I felt like he was about to have a really good second half of the season, and I felt like the best version of this Texans team was going to feature Collins coming back and then Diggs working off of that. But they needed that second weapon, and it looked like Diggs was kind of emerging and really being the only weapon while Collins was out. Since then, it's not been great in terms of where the weaponry's come from. They do get the good play from Dell in the New York game where they win. They lost to the Jets in that game, but Dell had a strong game. But Mechie, I thought, only got 2 targets in that game, but I thought he looked good, and Stroud missed him on both of them. One was a potential touchdown. In this game, he gets more work, 6 targets, 5 catches, 74 yards, and a TD. He catches a ball in some traffic for the touchdown. He's making plays in the short and intermediate range over the middle of the field. A little bit more of the Diggs type of usage, I think. He's a little bit thicker than you imagine for a little bit of a shorter receiver. But I thought he's like a good possession option in this game and somebody that might have the ability to work off of Nico. You need Nico to be the clear number one who can just win on everything, vertically down the field, etc. I don't know that Schultz is going to be the guy underneath. Dell's another more vertical option, I think. It looks to me like Mechie has a shot. Xavier Hutchinson has been playing the Nico role. It's going to go away, I think. It looks to me like Mechie has a shot to be that secondary underneath intermediate weapon they wanted Diggs to be. I thought he looked good in that type of a role. What do you think about Mechie?
I've always liked him and felt that he was an interesting flyer. At the same time, and anybody listening to the show is probably going to understand or be familiar with sort of his health issues and how it was a long road back from that. At the same time, the development this season, I think, has been, you could argue, just completely blocked for a while, but then still a little bit disappointing. It's weird to me that you would have Robert Woods involved in these games at all. If you have a Mechie who can do the things that, he should probably be able to do. Tank Dell, obviously a lot more routes than Mechie over the last couple of weeks, a lot more targets, a lot more catchable targets, a lot more yards, more than double the air yards. There have been, Dell has been disappointing this year, and yet there have been some really big plays that would have changed his stat line significantly that Stroud hasn't made the throw, which is not what you would have expected coming off of last season. But I think, we have to be truthful about it. He simply hasn't made those throws, and I don't think those are on Dell. Now, I think Dell has also not played as well as we would have expected. Now, he's dealt with some injury things. It seems like he's mostly over that. I guess my thought would be that if this team is going to be what they need to be the rest of the way, they have to unlock both Collins, which, he was completely unlocked. He was utterly dominant before the injury. But then you have to put Dell with that. You no longer have Diggs. But sometimes simply having the two guys is easier for the quarterback to work through. It's one of the things I've talked about some with Geno Smith, where you can dive into some of the play action numbers with two receivers, some of the motion numbers with three receivers. And Geno has simply been much better when he's got less to deal with and there are fewer options. I think that in the modern NFL, where defenses are doing so many difficult things, we talked about the this and that, as opposed to running a defensive set where they're simply following somewhat straightforward rules that can then be exploited by the offense who also knows those rules. Well, if you're having to deal with defenses that are instead attacking in multiple creative ways that are disguised, sometimes also having to deal with the three receivers can be a little bit difficult. Now, my thought would mostly be that if the offensive coordinator knows what he's doing, the quarterback isn't having to read all three guys every play. What you're hoping to do is that you have the routes working off of each other in a way that the defense doesn't know what's coming. You're using some misdirection. And because you have to account for all three from a defensive scheme perspective, it just makes it so difficult. I don't know that we're always seeing that. A big part of me believes that with Collins and Dell and not having to worry about Diggs, that both of these guys are going to be big forces the rest of the way. If the last couple of games in particular help the Texans learn this lesson that you are not going to be a dominant team based on riding Joe Mixon. Now, that's not a shot at Joe Mixon. Mixon has had his best season, and he's had a lot of very solid seasons. I was going back through an exercise that should be up on the site probably as people are listening to this, where I redrafted the last 10 rookie classes and then ranked them and did some different fun things with them. In some ways, that's just a project to have fun, for myself, but usually those are also fun for the readers.
Sounds awesome.
If you're enjoying them, then usually the readers will as well. One of the things that I did have to think through, because you don't have time to go back and research every single player, but I did quite a bit of research on the individual guys. Anybody that I was close with, should this guy be ranked higher or this guy? You dive into their. Joe Mixon has been better than what it feels to me like he's been historically, and then he's had a good year. But you're not going to ride Joe Mixon to a Super Bowl championship. You're simply not going to. He's not that kind of player. CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, and then with Tank Dell, maybe you can. I think that Mechie, if he continues to emerge, which would be a great story, and I think that he's good, then you have the three guys. Maybe we start to get CJ Stroud being closer to what we thought he was going to be. And one of the things that's just so frustrating about this season is that Patrick Mahomes is not a viable fantasy QB. CJ Stroud is not a viable QB. Obviously, someone like a Caleb Williams isn't even in the vicinity of being like a desperation super flex QB. That's a weird thing to say. I guess partly for me, it's that we need Stroud and then the play calling that you have hammered on. Those two things have to change dramatically before I would feel comfortable thinking that the third receiver is going to be able to ever start for you in a situation that's not going to be kind of luck-based, that's not going to be a one-off. But one of the things is both Dell and Collins have had injuries. They could both suffer some kind of aggravation. And maybe you simply need that, right? I mean, sometimes, especially when you think about how many players are going to be on bye in week 14, well, the Texans are one of those teams, so that's not going to help you. But yeah, I guess I'm enthusiastic about him for a reality perspective. I don't see how it works in fantasy unless some other things go seriously wrong for the Texans.
Or if things go seriously right, what if CJ Stroud starts to actually throw some touchdowns?
That would be good. I mean, you've kind of told me a story here where Mechie is going to be good and they're going to have three good guys and the Texans are going to go on a run. That would be awesome.
That'd be fun. We'll see. It's for me, it's just, a little bit more, I think, of the actual type of usage and that short to intermediate over the middle stuff is ability to win those tough catches. I think there's a role there and what they wanted from Diggs, and Diggs isn't there. And I don't know why Robert Woods was playing either, but I do think it's going to be fairly easy for Mechie to displace him when he starts to stack a couple of decent performances together. Like to me, it already has, because you mentioned Dell's left some plays on the field. I go back, look, Mechie only had 2 targets, but both of those were, one was a potentially big play and the other was a potential touchdown, a short touchdown. And Stroud missed both and he was open on both. And then the next week they come back and they get him 7 targets. He catches 6 of them and makes a really nice touchdown catch at one point. I mean, he looks like he's earning volume, but we'll see how that all actually pans out. What are the games that we got here? That game was crazy. The Dolphins winning over the Rams was mildly interesting. I mean, Puka Nacua gets a ton of work. Cooper Kupp looks good, sort of off of that as the 1B, I would say. They completely bench Raheem Mostert after the fumbles in 2 of the last 3 games. They were pretty costly. I mean, he plays on the passing downs. It's like they don't trust Jalen Wright yet on passing downs, but they use Jalen Wright as the secondary rusher. But really, it means a lot of Devon Achane, which has been the case for a while now. We get some more focus on Jalen Waddle as we get some weird reports about Tyreek Hill's wrists that I don't think any of us really realized were that big of a thing. His whole wrist issues. But Waddle, I thought, didn't look good necessarily.
We talk about that really unfortunate De'Ami Brown drop. At least that one, there's some pressure on you from the perspective of it's a touchdown and you don't get that many opportunities. And it just, yeah, you've got to catch it. But, you could really stretch for some excuses. The Jalen Waddle drop, he just can't catch. He just can't. He is maybe the worst elite receiver on contested catches. And then this catch is not contested. What are you doing? We love Jalen Waddle. He cannot play. He's going to never be on one of my teams again. Never.
That's where
I'm going to go the entire rest of my fantasy career and never draft Jalen Waddle. It doesn't matter how far he falls. The teams that he's on this year, he fell. 6th, 7th, 8th round. What's the price for Jalen Waddle?
That's where he's going to go next year. Why would he go higher? You're going to draft him.
No, Ben, the Dolphins can't throw the ball this year, but almost no one else can either. They might come up with some solutions. after the, joking ADP narrative where, maybe that's where Jalen Waddle goes if the first 48 picks in next year's draft are running backs, which at this point, maybe it's just like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and 48 running backs. But
no, I think Waddle's going to go a lot lower. He's been frustrating. This is the Kyle Pitts fall, where like the people that were willing, people already didn't like him. And the people that did like him that were willing to draft him this year, I had the same feeling you have. Nobody's going to want to draft him. He's going to go several rounds lower than even like makes logical sense. That's what I mean by the Kyle Pitts thing. Like, I'm not saying Kyle Pitts was a great pick or anything necessarily, but it felt like he was going multiple rounds lower than was logical just because he was Kyle Pitts. He had failed multiple times. I think Waddle's going to go in like the 8th round, at least.
Maybe I haven't thought through it. Maybe I'm going to have to draft some more Jalen Waddle, but I'm not going to be happy about it.
I'm not going to be happy about it either. I'm not whatsoever. I am at the point where, so he has a 36-yard catch in this game, and he's wide open, and it's on the opposite side of the field where Tua is even looking. First play of the game, they throw to him, kind of a first read thing. It was great because all of last week, they didn't get him the ball until like the 4th quarter, and then he ends up catching a TD. But I was like, man, he's just not a part of the offense. First play of the game, they throw to him. Great. First read, like a RPO. They throw him a slant. A couple plays later, he has a 36-yard catch, but this is the one I just cut my own self off because I love to do that. He's wide open on one side of the field, but Tua's looking to the other side. He needs to extend the play, which Tua doesn't do a lot. You don't get those opportunities in the NFL a lot, but the protection is good. He's able to extend it, come back around, find Waddle on the other side of the field where Waddle, this is kind of like the Trey McBride play we were talking about this week. Waddle sort of comes back to the ball and just waits for it to get to him. Could have been a touchdown if the ball's just thrown to him on time. But he's not a part of the offense is the point I'm trying to make. Like, he's running clear out routes over here, and then they get back over to him in the progression because, Tua's breaking the pocket led him to that side of the field more or less. And he finds him, and he throws, and he gets a 36-yard play. From there, Sean, one catch the rest of the game. Those are two catches on the first drive, and I'm kind of excited. You mentioned the drop, how horrible that was. He's not in the offense anymore. It used to be Tyreek and Waddle, and you're almost feeling like they could use Waddle even a little more, but they weren't necessarily. Tyreek's hurt. They're talking about his wrist and all this stuff. They didn't use him a lot either, but they're going to Jonnu and everyone else, and really it's a Devon Achane offense now. It's all about Devon Achane, which is exciting for any team where you have Devon Achane. And then they are spreading the passing game stuff around. They are going to, I didn't feel like the ancillary pieces were being used a ton in this game either. Jonnu just a little bit later on. Odell Beckham ends up catching a couple passes. Malik Washington has a rushing TD. You mentioned pre-show. He looked fast as hell on that play. It was exciting. But it wasn't one of these games where it's like, man, Jonnu's doing everything. It was like late in the game, Jonnu got a couple passes. Waddle leads the team with 6 targets and receiving yards and everything. It's just like not impressive. Like a good.
Yeah, you can't play him. You can't play him. And Hill is so very clearly hurt. In that exercise I just referenced, I was trying to decide between Derrick Henry and Tyreek Hill for the 101 in their class. And I defaulted to Henry because the things that he has done and is doing as a running back are so extraordinary. And then you go back through and you look at Tyreek Hill. And even if you know that Tyreek Hill has been a dominant force, the likes of which the NFL has like rarely ever seen, the numbers still blow you away. This is a guy who put up 334 points in a 16-game season in 2018, 329 points in 15 games in 2020, barely misses 300 in 2021, 341 points in 2022, and 378 points last season. Those are absolutely extraordinary numbers for a receiver. He's not, it's not that he's like at 80%. I mean, he shouldn't be out there is the takeaway that I have based on how he's playing right now. They've got a variety of guys. I mean, you could make the case that it doesn't really make sense for them to continue using Tua. I've pushed back on that, saying their team is good. And if you're going to play a guy with a concussion ever, you kind of have to play him once he's healthy again. Their team has all these salary cap problems. Like a lot of teams, it makes sense for them to actually make a push as opposed to throw seasons away. There's less value to that, and it damages your morale. It damages your fan base. It's non-competitive, which these players haven't, and coaches don't spend all that time to go out there and not compete on Sundays. But even with the win, and this was a bizarre game where if you watched it, you felt like the Rams were dominating it. For them to lose is a huge setback for them because the NFC West is wide open. Yeah, I mean, the Dolphins have some real problems in that you have a lot of worries for Tua, and Tyreek Hill is injured. And he's injured, and he's not young. And that's not to say that, he's going to have his performance in the future fall off a cliff. But, I mean, this was the season the Dolphins were going to be right there with the Chiefs and the Lions as the best team in football, and things just haven't fallen the right way.
What did you think about, well, I know what you thought about it. The Rams, 4th and goal from the 4. I assume what you thought about it. 4th and goal from the 4, 6.5 minutes remaining, down 11 points. They kicked a field goal to cut the game to 8, which I thought was not only the worst decision of the week, a decision that we thankfully don't see in 2024 as much anymore. We haven't had to talk about those types of things in the show a lot. It was one of the worst decisions of the season. It's 4th and 4, 6.5 minutes left. You're down 11. You kick a field goal to cut it to 8, which then requires all of these things to happen. You have to get a stop. You have to score a touchdown. And then even if you just do those things, you've only allowed yourself 2 coin flips, which are you have to get a 2-point conversion to force OT. When we talk about these late game decisions, one of the big things that's always missed is forcing OT is not winning the game. That's creating a coin flip situation. The 8-point game we've talked about before late should be thought of as 2 possessions because you need the 2-point conversion just to force OT, right? Now you're doing 2 coin flips. It's 25% if everything goes right. They had it 4th and goal from the 4. 6.5 minutes left. You're not going to get a ton more drives here. And as Jacob Sanderson pointed out to me on Twitter, you kick the field goal so you don't have a do or die play there, but that forces the 2-point conversion. So you're more or less, you could have just done the 2-point conversion on 4th and goal from the 4-yard line instead of now forcing yourself to have to get a 2-point conversion later. Why not force yourself to get the TD there? One of the things when you're down 11 that I've seen a couple of times this year, I saw my Washington Huskies do once, you have to score the touchdown first because then you know if you got the conversion. If you do get the conversion, then you can kick the field goal to force OT. I'm okay with that once you know that you have the 8 from the touchdown, but you go for the 2 when, you got to get the TD first. You go for the 2. If you don't get it, then you know you need another touchdown, right? And if you do get the second touchdown, you can win in regulation. You still have that path available to you, but you can kick the field goal. That's my point. 4th and goal from the 4, 6.5 minutes. Sean McVay's been bad at this stuff in the past, but he makes a decision that more or less ends his team's chance to win the game right there because you now need a parlay of so many things to happen. What does happen is Miami drives down and kicks a field goal and still leaves enough time on the clock for the Rams to have a drive. And that's the other big thing that these coaches never seem to think about when they're planning how everything can go right. This parlay of things. We'll get a stop. We'll get a touchdown. We'll get a conversion. We'll win an OT. This huge parlay of things that they need to go right. They don't think about the fact that there's another team playing them that can still score other points and do other things. Once the Dolphins went and kicked that field goal, obviously now you would have preferred to go for it on the previous drive. You look back on it at that moment because now you're back down 11. You're down 23-12. You're like, man, if we just would have got a touchdown on the last drive, we're still in this. You would have scored a TD and made it 20-15. You would have went for 2 to try to cut it to 3. Either get it or don't. After the Dolphins kick that field goal, it's either 23-17 or maybe they don't kick the field goal. Maybe it changes their math, but it's either 23-17 or 23-15. You're still in striking distance. And again, being down 23-15 at that point would have been rough. But you basically would have been doing the down 14, go for 2 on the first touchdown thing, but prior to it actually being a 14-point game. For anyone who's not following all those specifics, essentially the key point is by kicking the field goal and leaving it 8, When the Dolphins kicked another field goal, you're now done. You just lost. There's too many things you need to get right. You have to take on more risk and go for the touchdown now, so that there's uncertainty with the rest of the game. There's optionality. These are the types of things we talk about in fantasy. So there's the ability for you to still win, even if the Dolphins go kick that field goal and get to 23, which they ultimately did. I didn't even care. They end up kicking another field goal later. I saw some people commenting on that. They kick a field goal with 3rd and 10, 39 seconds left to cut it to 8 again. I don't even care as much about that, because that's a scenario where you're going to have to get an onside kick either way. I still think you need to score first in those scenarios. This trend of kicking the field goal first when you need an onside kick is weird, because then often you're going to leave yourself with a Hail Mary. It's a lot easier in today's day and age to make a 58-yard field goal than it is to complete like a 50-yard Hail Mary. But I didn't mind that as much, because you need an onside kick either way. And it's just like, whatever, that's the decision. The Dolphins weren't going to come back and score the other way, and you were going to need 2 scores and whatever. There wasn't a lot of time left. One of those scores was probably going to be a field goal. At that point, it's sort of a tomato thing. It is what it is. The one at 6:30, there's too many ways that the game can go the rest of the way with 6 minutes and 30 seconds left. That include, again, the Dolphins coming back and kicking a field goal, or a lot of these different things. You just have to maximize points is what it comes down to. You're at the 4-yard line. You have to have a touchdown there. And then you have the potential, like I said, to potentially win in regulation. Even after, if the Dolphins have a relatively similar drive, even after a field goal, you have the potential to force overtime still. They could have won this game, but they took away their only path by opting to kick a field goal. The coaching decision literally so damaged their path to winning. Just, I don't know. The idea of delaying a loss, we know that NFL teams do that. That one was a horrible choice. You have to go for the touchdown there, even if it means that you lose on that play.
I agree with that. I do think that some of the things that they're thinking about include tactics that are specific as opposed to more general. One of the things that you get from going for the 4th down by the 4-yard line in other times of the game is that if you don't get it, there's a huge value to having your opponent pinned. You still have value to that, because as you mentioned, when you kick a field goal and they kick off, then they have a much easier drive to get in field goal range, which then changes the score situation. But when you're down there at the end of the game, possessions become more important than field position, at least relatively speaking, to what they would be at a different time in the game.
Yeah.
And they're worried about the number of possessions that are remaining. For a lot of these teams, I think if you are running different schemes that are no longer on defense, really constructed to force 3 and outs, and you're not as comfortable with your ability to do that. Now, I would think that the NFL teams are still going to say, we still have packages to make stops. We can make stops, or at least we can create a context in which stops would potentially occur in the same way we would in the past. We just don't deploy them tactically in situations where we understand it no longer makes sense. So that would be another element to it. But one of the things about that from the 4, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it's going to be a difficult type of play, because the analytics have been so clear in that the way that you score down by the goal line is running the ball. But there's going to be a difference between the 1 or the 2 and the 4. And once you're back at the 4 and you're trying to throw a pass, and now you're into this environment where the expectation for scoring is not actually very high. So you talk about the number of different things that all have to happen if you kick a field goal. But the opposite of that is simply that if you are trying to score a touchdown on the 4th and 4 from the 4, you've added a thing there that has to be accomplished if you go for the touchdown. That is definitely not easy. And I think that as you're trying to balance out these things as a coach and you're thinking through it, is that you don't know like how easy it might simply be to score a touchdown on a subsequent drive, either because there's a breakdown or you don't get into a bad down and distance situation. The touchdown might actually not be a problem on a subsequent drive. and you're thinking to yourself, in order for us to win, we have to get a stop, right? You're not thinking like we can somehow, there's no situation in which you're thinking through, we can give up a score and still win the game. As you pointed out, if you actually score a touchdown and then score another touchdown, then that field goal doesn't kill you. So,
and I mean, an admirable devil's advocate attempt there. But even in the scenario you just described, they still have to get the 2-point conversion and then win in overtime. They still have to do the 2 coin flip thing. That's a 25% thing if everything goes right. And I would argue that pinning them down inside the 5 thing is actually still a benefit here because there's 6.5 minutes left. They're almost certainly going to just run the ball a few different times because they're like, well, we're still up 11. And then they punt it. You get actually a short field. You can still get 2 more drives there with the timeouts and the 2-minute warning. You should be able to score pretty quickly, and then you can even probably kick off deep and try to get a stop.
You say that. One of the things that cracked me up in this game was that after they went down 23-12, they then ran a 12-play drive to go back and get their additional field goal. Now, they didn't burn a ton of time with the 12 plays, but the 12 plays were hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, look, all of these things are very limited probability outcomes, but that's again why I'm saying you have to just go for the you laid out a lot of really interesting things, and I think you're right that it is not like it's not an easy possession to score. My argument is by choosing to kick the field goal, you lost. You basically gave yourself
Kupp and Kyren Williams, so I was not rooting for them to kick a field goal.
Yeah, no, for sure. And they should have. Stafford missed Kyren on the 3rd down. The broadcast highlighted it. It was frustrating, but Kyren came out of the backfield and would have had a walk-in touchdown. He would have hit him at like the 2 or the 3 yard line, but he would have had a walk-in. He catches a lot of those down there, and that's part of his touchdown equity is those types of plays. Stafford just missed it. He's looking right in that general area and threw beyond Kyren when he could have just checked it down. Boom, touchdown, easy. But that's part of why I'm like, man, you got to try it again because the play prior was 2nd and goal from the 10. They got a 6-yard gain. Look, they only had the 1 play down inside the 5. You got to go out. It's not like they stopped on 3 straight plays or something, and the defense is holding up. And it's contextually to me, I actually felt like the Rams were moving the ball and had a decent chance at a successful play there and should have. But again, all of that just goes back to the small percentages, and none of this is like particularly likely. And I do agree with what you were saying generally about it. It's not easy. I just think you have to take the risk there, regardless, because I think by kicking the field goal, you've created a scenario that is. And I also agree with your point that you can sometimes get the fluky touchdown later. But even considering all of that, you've created a scenario that you still need a 2-point conversion later and an overtime win. It's just too much. It's too much to leave on the plate as opposed to even a lower probability of getting that 4th and 4 because it is a little bit trickier. You do have to throw, etc. You still have to try. I mean, I think you have to take the aggressiveness there. But yeah, no, I mean, that was it was a not a very fun Monday Night Football. I was gonna say it was a fun game, but it wasn't.
I mean, you go back to the different things you have to accomplish, and one of the things that I've been kind of thinking about that is really a completely different topic, but I've been thinking about as you went through all that was simply what is the preparation like? Because one of the things I don't have a lot of insight into, even though, I do have a few contacts within the game, is just how you prepare for all of this stuff, because football just seems so immensely complex and so difficult to get ready for. You think about some of the things we've seen from the Kansas City Chiefs, where they appear to hold back their best plays throughout the entire season, and then even into like the second half of the Super Bowl. It takes both some real confidence and arguably some arrogance and arguably some poor decision making to go that route.
Yeah,
because those plays maybe were necessary at different points. But certainly, I think one of the things I would be doing as a coach would be spending a lot of time on these most important plays. How do you design them so that you have the tactical edge? And then how do you practice them so that you're ready to execute? Obviously, I expect that NFL teams do that as well. But it was reminding me of a situation at the end of the Bengals game where a couple weeks ago, it was mind-boggling that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers did not go for 2 at the end of the game against the Chiefs. On Thursday night, you have the Bengals. They do go for 2 against the Ravens. They appear to have that play set up with Jamar Chase one-on-one. And then my understanding of it is that they call a timeout and they end up running a somewhat complicated play where you're trying to throw a conversion to Tanner Hudson with the game on the line. Now, this was a pretty controversial situation because it did appear that the Ravens committed at least 2 somewhat significant penalties. But the thing I think that, if you're a Bengals fan and you just, are kind of thinking that probably those penalties did not, the specific things that happened didn't determine how the play happened. Although, maybe, the play was going to go to Tanner Hudson. So Gesicki getting held didn't matter, right? The face mask happened after the ball was gone. It didn't matter. Now, I'm not saying the penalty shouldn't have been called. They should have been called. All those things are very frustrating, but we didn't focus on this game. It happened all the way back on last Thursday. And yet it probably was like easily the most exciting game of the week. And the only thing you can really come away from that game with is how do you have Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and start every year as though you haven't practiced and then continue that for a full month before you start to get things going. But even in this particular game where you have, again, a historic level performance from this QB wide receiver combination with the game on the line, is that the play that you would run? Maybe that play usually works in the fact that the defense is expecting you to throw it to somebody else or run a different type of play is the answer. But we know that Chase Brown has been very effective down by the goal line. If you're spread out, that's when actually running it, even from where they have the 2-point conversion, that's very effective. And then you have Jamar Chase. So even beyond whether or not you should go, I think from a team preparation perspective, I just really want to see my teams have plays like we've gotten from the Kansas City Chiefs in the most important moments. And I think that a lot of times you're like, well, this isn't the most important moment. But for the Bengals, their season was arguably very much on the line on that play.
Yeah, I'm literally watching it again right now. They didn't even have Chase Brown on the field. They had a fullback or a backup tight end. It must be like Drew Sample, who is in the backfield just pass blocking. So you don't even give the threat of the run and you just go 4 wide. And there were some penalties, but yeah, I agree. I didn't like that play at all. I thought it was just it's got to come out quick and it's going to Hudson. It's a 1-read play. Like you said, you have Jamar Chase. You're not even looking at him. He's on the other side of the field. I wanted to go back and look and see, as you described that, what else was there? Because I didn't really look at where Chase was or anything. And anyway, he's on the other side of the field and Bro gets rid of the ball really quickly. It's a clear first read play. I'm with you. I think that was I'll give you another one though about these late game decisions. Give you a chance to redeem yourself after you defended Sean McVay. Zach Taylor, 4th and 16 from the Baltimore 40. It's a 58-yard field goal, but you have Evan McPherson. He's been missing these long field goals, but kickers are banging these like they're easy. It's a night game. It's outdoors, but there was no wind. I went back and looked. Limited wind, and it was a reasonably nice night as far as the weather that they listed on Pro Football Reference. They list weather for every game because I couldn't remember the specific weather situation, but that's the way that they had it listed. They punted from the plus 40. Well, okay, so they had a 1st and 10 from the 34, took a 6-yard sack, and then they had 2nd and 16 and 3rd and 16. And they threw both times. You want Burrow to have the ball, but 2 incomplete passes. The 3rd and 16 ends up being a deep pass instead of just setting up a better field goal. This is when it was 21-14. It's the early 4th quarter. They punted from the 40. Wouldn't you take the risk of a 58-yard field goal against Lamar Jackson? I know they had stopped them for most of the day, but the irony of it is Tylan Wallace's long TD came right after that, and the Ravens went on to score touchdowns on all of their 3 drives after that. So 3 straight touchdowns the rest of the way. You know that Lamar Jackson's going to do that. They played this whole game like they knew that. They were going for it on 4th downs. They were aggressive. They went for it at the 2-point conversion late. Played the whole game like they knew they had to win it with their offense, and they couldn't bank. They punted. I know it was 4th and 16, and you're probably thinking, I want to be able to go for it. And they're like, oh, well, I can't go for it, so what am I going to do? But they're at the 40-yard line, and they have the potential for a 58-yard field goal. They punt it down to the 8. They wind up giving up a long touchdown moments later. So the whole idea, the reason you don't punt is all you're netting is like 30 yards on the side of the field where those 30 yards don't really matter. You just got to keep them out of the end zone is the bigger, a lot of teams are going to matriculate it down the field, and then you try to get your stop or whatever, bend, don't break. Again, they had played good defense all game, but I think the risk is worth it. Maybe your kicker's telling you he doesn't have the leg for it or whatever, but McPherson does. I think in any condition, have 58-yard field goal. I think this was a choice because he's missed some 50-yarders. It was, we're going to punt it, we're going to pin him, we're going to play good defense. They give up an immediate touchdown. They give up 2 more. And you go to the late game stuff, and it's from that point forward, they're basically trading possessions. The Bengals had actually a turnover on downs after this, and I was fine with it. That one was in better field goal range, but they were up 21-20 because Baltimore missed an extra point after the Tylan Wallace TD, and then later got a 2-point conversion. If you're up by 1 to make it a 4-point game when you have a 4th and 2 at the 34, I think you do go for it in that spot. And they did, and they didn't get it, and whatever. That's one of those ones where it's hindsight 2020 that they didn't get it. I don't think you can complain about going for it on 4th and 2 with this offense and the way that they played. They went down and scored touchdowns on each of their next 2 drives. Like the Bengals wanted to bank it on their offense, and their offense did well. But the one I don't get is the 4th and 16 that you couldn't go for it and you punted. What would you have done in that spot?
Yeah, I think it's the opponent and your own kicker. It's going to be helpful to bury Lamar Jackson, just like it's helpful to bury anybody else. And, in a similar fashion to Josh Allen, because he's larger than life, you do occasionally get some mistakes that a lesser quarterback wouldn't make because they know that they are not able to make the play that these guys try and make. But yeah, you have to go put up points. And we talked about that sort of exchange of field goals at the end of the Detroit-Houston game really favoring Detroit, but at least Houston gave their guy a shot, and maybe it didn't make sense there. Yeah, you'd have to kind of be on the inside. We got the dust up between Deebo Samuel and the long snapper. You have guys who are normally absolutely automatic, like Younghoe Koo, struggling this week. So you get some weird things. And McPherson has been disappointing. But it's a matter of, do you hit it right or not? I mean, if you hit it, the 58 yards is not a big deal from McPherson. Now, one of the things, after we had one of these conversations a couple of weeks ago, I went back and tried to do some research on how much of a difference that makes. And one of the things that I ran across that I wasn't expecting is that, not surprisingly, the farther out you go, the less centered those kicks are. It's not just, can you get it there? It's, every little bit of offline makes a difference. I mean, you think about the Detroit kicks and how he snuck both of them in, those types of elements are there. And even some of the missed kicks. I mean, they're bare misses. Like, there are very few shanks. Now, I think the Fairbairn one was a shank, but most of them, when they miss, they barely miss, and every extra yard matters. If you miss a short one, I mean, I think there's even been some, criticism of the Broncos, and you're like, that one is only missed if it's blocked. I don't know. You see the guys miss the extra points. I mean, you can miss it. Yeah. I think you can criticize a block.
It was a 35-yarder. They got themselves in reasonable space. Yeah, I agree.
But it's going to be harder, right? I mean, you can hit it and still miss it. But, 58 yards is right there for McPherson. And even though I know the extra yardage matters, I think that when you're talking about limited possessions and you're talking about explosive offenses, you got to score when you have the ball. Value of the opponent's drive based on field position, I think you have to sell that. You have to buy the possession. And you just have to respect the opponent's offense and what they have done, not just to you, but to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. To everybody. This is who the Ravens are. You've played every game these teams play is a shootout. They know what the deal is. They go in. I mean, the Bengals and Ravens have played some incredible football games for years now. The Burrow-Lamar battles have been fantastic. But yeah, you said it the way that I was thinking about it, which is that it's a possession game. These were the results of the possessions after that punt, the rest of the game. Touchdown Ravens, turnover on downs, Bengals, touchdown Ravens, touchdown Bengals, touchdown Ravens, touchdown Bengals, end of game. At what point were the Bengals going to get more points in this football game? You maximize the possessions. You only get so many. We talk about a possession game. You got to get, like, when we talk about these things, and the big mistake that I think everyone makes is you think about what happens if you fail. And you should think about what happens if you succeed, right? Like, you got to be willing. That's how Dan Campbell plays it. Like, man, you got to be willing to think about, what do I get if I'm right? Right? Because when we talked about the McVay thing a minute ago, some of your counters were really strong, but also it's like, I felt like some of those were relative to what if you fail, but what about if you succeed? You set up some great situations if you're able to succeed. And this one is that, I think, to a T, where the potential for 3 points there to push the game from 7 to 10, as opposed to punting it back. And now they have, people don't like the word momentum, but it was 21-7, and the Ravens had just scored prior to that to make it 21-14, finally cut it to 7. This is your opportunity to get it back to 2 scores, and instead you give it back to them, and they get this feeling of, we're in this game. We got a chance to go tie the game here. We've mostly been outplayed. I mean, I think you have to take the opportunity to maybe put 3 points on the board, because where else on those other drives, they did have the one other turnover on downs, but for the most part, everyone is maximizing scoring on these drives in this game. But that's the way it goes the rest of the way. You only get so many opportunities. It's very similar to a punt the Commanders had against the Ravens, and the same thing happened. They went back and forth. I've referenced it a few times that I thought Dan Quinn took the opportunity for Jane Daniels to get into an all-time duel with Lamar Jackson out of his hands. They were down 7 instead of up 7, but they punted in a situation where it was only like 4th and 6 in plus territory, and they punted, and the Ravens went and made it 14 or whatever, and then Daniels matched Lamar every drive after that. There was 2 that were field goals where the Ravens got a field goal, Commanders got a field goal, but there was touchdown, field goal, whatever, and then the game ends. And you're like, they had to have that possession where they punted. They had to have the scoring touchdown. It was late in the third. Like, there's not a lot of possessions left when you make these decisions. I know teams want to be able to say, look, we're going to be able to go get a stop on defense. And it's easy in hindsight when you don't get the stop to have this conversation. Because as you talked about when we were talking about the Rams stuff, sometimes there are different things, and sometimes stops do happen. I have a tendency to think through, like, defenses aren't going to get stops just because they don't always get stops. They do sometimes. I just think in a game like this and in some of these environments, you get in these shootouts, you play a team like the Ravens, their defense is not good. You go attack their defense, in those spots. That was the Commanders one. In the Bengals one, you have to understand the way to beat the Ravens is to outscore them, is not to give up possessions with punts and then expect their offense to not be able to just eat up that extra yardage. That punt yardage doesn't matter. Giving up the possession matters. That's the key.
And the thing that I think is mostly filtered in for coaches, but can still, I think, be occasionally misleading, because we have this bank of knowledge that we rely on, is simply that the other tiny little things, because teams are going for it on 4th and 1, 4th and 2, you're going to get fewer stops. And so that stop where you're thinking, we could potentially get that, you're calibrated a little bit incorrectly, simply because football has changed. So if you have a lot of hours, a lot of plays in, and you're thinking about that stop, the stop doesn't happen in the same way. So that is a tiny little element of it as well. Basically, it's more fun if the teams go, especially if they go and score and don't just go and then like run the ball 15 more times and soak the rest of the game away. The short games, so Ben, the bad games bother me and the short games bother me. It's like, I just want to see these guys play football. So
yeah, this was a bad week. It was a lot of unders, and yet we still managed to record for a really long time talking about it. But yeah, a lot of unders, a lot of favorites on the road that weren't necessarily playing to the top of their ability. We didn't talk about the Falcons a lot. Didn't look great with the Saints. We got a great Bijan game. I thought he looked fantastic. 3 straight goal line stuffs for Tyler Algier. They bring in Bijan on 4th down. Like, oh, he'll figure it out. And my favorite part of that was on the replay. They had Greg Olsen breaking it down, and he's like, look at this. They collapsed the whole left side of the line, and then he finds his way, just kind of falls forward and finds his way to the end zone. He started doing the breakdown as if Bijan didn't score. And then he's like, but oh yeah, also like he did score. Because like the defensive line did collapse, but he has that stop, start, and agility, and he kind of did a little one hop fall forward. I thought it was a really nice little run on fourth down that shows why, like, he probably does. I mean, a lot of that's just variance down there close, but he does have a little bit better ability than Algier. He's more of a one-cut, straight-line runner. He ran into a wall 3 times in a row. Bijan scores on fourth, also hits for a 30-something yard touchdown run. We finally got the long TD run from him. I'm becoming a massive Bijan Robinson fan. I mean, I was really on him preseason, but the way that his season didn't go great from week 1, people were kind of out on him, and I've been a little bit of an apologist. Yeah, he's very awesome.
We'll see if we can have Column just bleep that.
Bleep that out.
Be a lot funnier.
I think you're absolutely. I love that you said that because I mean, Derrick Henry's crushing, and I'm getting questions about Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and how Joe Mixon is an elite running back and these things that are like. I'm just look. I mean, I wasn't on these guys, so it's exhausting. But obviously, those guys have played incredibly well. I would take Bijan right now. He's going to finish as the RB1. I think you're absolutely right. He looks incredible. We haven't talked about him.
His trip and fall down touchdown after they did play much better defense against Tyler Algier 3 times, notwithstanding. Sometimes you get lucky, right? They stuff
interesting
short yardage back 3. I mean, sometimes you gotta have the other guy stuffed, right?
Trip and fall down? You didn't think that was a ballerina move? I thought that was an incredible play.
It seemed like I didn't remember Greg Olsen describing it that way, but yeah. Bijan, not his best run. We did get the long. He's amazing. He's gonna be the RB1
guy. He is. But yeah, that was one of those games where the road favorite that had been playing well didn't show up necessarily. Talked about a bunch of those. 49ers, we didn't talk a lot about. Ricky Pearsall has a long TD catch. I thought Juwan Jennings looked great. By the end of that game, speaking of broadcasters, Tom Brady circling Juwan Jennings with a teleprompter saying this is their key guy. That debate of Pearsall versus Jennings. Pearsall's long TD was great. I still left this game feeling like Jennings is the guy out of those two. But Pearsall still has both of them meaningful upside, right?
Were you also hoping that George Kittle will mostly pass block?
Yeah, no, that wasn't great, but he did make a sick. All of his plays in this game were insane. He made the awesome catch and run play where he's just like doing his great yak ability. He made the toe tap touchdown. What was the third one? It was it's the one where it was a high throw, and it probably should have been a pick, but like because you can't get your hands up high enough, and so often the receivers will then just like volleyball set it up, and then some safety's going to catch it. But somehow, while he's completely outstretched, he also has like the soft hands to where he tips it to himself and catches it. I mean, it should have went over his head for a pick. He makes an incredible, 15-yard catch on just a not very good throw by deflecting it up in the air and then tracking it down. The toe tap TD, how good was that?
My take from years of watching George Kittle is that it just wasn't possible that with how good of a season he was having, that they would bring Christian McCaffrey back and they would stop using George Kittle completely. They tried. He broke through for those 2 amazing plays that you mentioned, all 3, but the 2 late rescue the day. And I mean, you hear from different things in like the Playmaker series, and that's not what that one was called. The Netflix series on the receivers that like he's the coolest guy ever. At some point, you're just like, George, go mention to them that you're the best player on this offense. They don't have to wait for the end of the game.
Yeah. Get a little angry about not getting the football. That would be helpful. All right. I think we talked about enough games, right?
Well, Ben, that is going to do it for our week 10 to week 11 stealing bananas. We'll cut this up to make it a little more digestible for everyone. We appreciate everybody listening. Yeah. Even on a down week, very few things as much fun as playing fantasy football and talking about fantasy football with a friend. We hope you all are having those conversations. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me as always is Ben Gretch. You can follow Yards Per Gretch at Stealing Signals. He mentioned the Stealing Lions product. You want to make sure you are signed up for that. Then we have currently a 3-month sub discounted heavily at RotoViz. Anybody who wants to make their playoff push and get ready for the prospect content, we would love to have you. Until then, leave us a rating and review. Those help us a ton on the podcast. Listen to Ben on Ship Chasing. Join Column and me on RotoViz Overtime. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.